The girl stood outside the glass doors of the towering building, her toes pressing against the cold pavement. For a moment, she hesitated, staring at her reflection on the shiny surface, messy hair tied back, a faded dress carefully washed and ironed, and feet bare except for the dust that clung to them. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and golden lights. The soft echo of her footsteps caught the attention of those already waiting. Rows of sharply dressed men and women sat with leather portfolios in hand, their polished shoes tapping lightly on the floor. A few glanced up at her and then quickly looked away, whispering behind polite smiles. She felt their stares prickling her skin, but she straightened her back and walked to the receptionist's desk. The receptionist, a woman in a crisp navy suit, looked her up and down. For a second, the girl thought she would be asked to leave. But when she softly said, "I'm here for the interview," her voice carried a calmness that surprised even herself. The receptionist blinked, nodded slowly, and handed her a slip of paper with her name written in neat letters. She found an empty chair at the end of the row, away from the others. She sat quietly, folding her hands over her small folder of documents, and looked around. While the others adjusted their ties and touched up their makeup, she closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer only her heart could hear. This was her chance, and she would not let fear take it from her. The candidates were led inside one by one. The room was wide, with tall windows that spilled sunlight over a polished wooden table stretching across the center. At the far end sat the Millionaire CEO, an imposing figure in a tailored suit, his eyes sharp, watching each person with quiet intensity. The first few candidates spoke with practiced confidence. They recited achievements, degrees, and glowing experiences, their words smooth but rehearsed. The CEO nodded politely, his expression unreadable. When her turn came, the barefoot girl stood slowly, clutching her folder as though it were her only shield. The click of polished shoes fell silent, and the faint rustle of papers stopped. She walked to the front, her steps light but steady. A few candidates exchanged smirks, one even raising an eyebrow at the sight of her bare feet against the pristine floor. She drew in a breath and opened her folder, revealing a few wrinkled documents, nothing compared to the glossy resumes of the others. Instead of launching into rehearsed lines, she spoke from her heart. She talked about how she had worked since childhood to help her family, about evenings spent studying under a streetlight when there was no electricity at home, about how she wanted this job not for luxury but for the chance to prove herself and change her future. Her voice wavered at first, but then it grew stronger. There was no arrogance, no attempt to impress, only truth. For a long moment, the hall was silent. Even those who had mocked her earlier now sat still, their smirks gone. The CEO leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her, as though he had been waiting for something real amid all the polished words. The CEO rose from his chair, his polished shoes echoing softly as he walked down the long line of candidates. Each one straightened their backs, hoping to catch his attention, their resumes stacked neatly in front of them like trophies. He stopped briefly at a few, asking sharp questions, nodding, and then moving on. When he reached the barefoot girl, the room seemed to hold its breath. He stood before her, his gaze steady but not unkind. For a moment, he said nothing, just looking at her small folder and then down at her feet. "Why did you come barefoot?" he asked at last, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the others lean forward. The girl swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her folder. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I had enough money either to buy shoes or to pay for the bus fare to come here," she said softly. "If I bought the shoes, I would never have made it to the interview. So I chose the bus." A silence swept the room. The polished candidates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their rehearsed answers suddenly feeling hollow. What had seemed like weakness now revealed a sacrifice none of them had ever imagined making. The CEO's expression did not change, but his eyes lingered on her a little longer, as though he had just found something rare, something none of the expensive suits in the room. The CEO returned to his seat at the head of the table. The tension in the room was thick. Every candidate sat upright, eyes fixed on him, waiting for the final decision. The poor girl kept her head lowered, clutching her folders so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She had spoken her truth, but part of her heart whispered that honesty might not be enough in a world built on appearances. After a long silence, The CEO leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. I have listened to all of you, he began, his deep voice carrying across the hall. I've heard polished words, impressive degrees, and well-prepared speeches. But there is one among you who showed me something none of the others could. Murmurs rippled through the line of candidates, eyes darting toward one another. The CEO's gaze stopped at the barefoot girl. You, he said firmly. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. The room fell into stunned silence. Some jaws dropped, others frowned in disbelief. A few whispered, unable to hide their shock. She had nothing to hide, the CEO continued, his voice steady. Her honesty, her sacrifice, and her determination are worth more than 1,000 polished resumes. Skills can be taught, but character, that cannot be bought or faked. And she has it. The girl's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She whispered a shaky, "Thank you," her voice breaking. The other candidates sat frozen, unable to comprehend how the girl they had mocked only moments ago had won the position all of them had fought for. The CEO stood, walking over to her, and extended his hand. She rose slowly, her bare feet pressing against the cold floor, and placed her trembling hand in his. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one she had only dared to dream of.